Virginia. If this opening slide looks like you, okay, if you've made a lot of maple syrup this last season, and many of us have, if you're appropriately masked and social distancing to stay safe and allow the country to open up, and if you're wondering, if you got a frown on, kind of wondering what to do with all this stuff that you've made because all your markets have closed, and how is that going to all work out in the long run? If that's you, you're at the right place at the right time with this webinar. These are times of uncertainty. We don't know what's coming. We know what's here. We don't know when this is going to be over. But times of uncertainty can also be times of opportunity. And our panelists over the next 2 evenings will explore opportunities that we have as maple syrup producers, part of the maple industry, opportunities to think differently about our products, opportunities to think differently about our markets, our businesses, and opportunities to think and interact differently with the customers we serve. Tonight's presentations, we've got 4 speakers in the next 2 hours. Karen Milnes with Future Generations will be talking about the future of farmers markets. Many of us rely on farmers markets, direct sales to customers. How do you do that when you can't invite them in? Okay, how's this all going to work? Hannah Scott will follow. She's with Ohio State University. She's going to be talking about cooperatives. This is the time we all want to cooperate and move forward, move our industry forward, and the role that cooperatives can play at assessing getting to new markets. Fred Arns, Richards Maple Products in Ohio, is going to be talking about what we refer to as the Ohio Miracle Maple Mile. Fred says he's got a lot of good ideas. He's only going to share some of them with us, keep the others secret. But this is a real good idea that really works in Ohio, and we'll see how we can learn from that. And then finally, we'll wrap up the evening with Kathleen Terry, who's the CEO of Appalachian Sustainable Development, with a talk titled Liberating Your Grocery Store, How Appalachian Sustainable Development Works to Bring Small Producers into the Big Time. You look at your grocery store, there's a syrup there. Is it yours? If it's not, how do you get it? How do you get yours there? What's the secret? Appalachian Sustainable Development has been working to crack that nut with small producers of many, many different commodities in our region. After the presentations, we'll have a time for questions, okay? And there's a question and answer feature on the webinar page. You'll be asked to type out any questions. And then when you do type those questions, there'll be a moderator, Kate Photos, will be looking at them and then reading them. And please address specific questions to specific speakers. Question period will be after all speakers have finished their presentations. As a follow-up, all these presentations are being recorded and will be available to anyone to share through YouTube. And slide presentations specifically will be posted on the Future Generations University website. And you all know how to get there because that's how you registered for this event. With that, we'll get going here, and I'll turn it over to Karen Milnes to talk to us about what's happening in the farm.
It's thinking. Hey folks, can you all see this? I'm Karen Milnes. I just want to touch on a couple points that Mike made about the questions and answers. If you see in the bottom of the webinar, there's a Q&A tab. So you can type your questions at any time. And after each presentation, each presenter, if it's addressed to them, will get on and get some of those answers to you. So we can have those ongoing throughout the webinar tonight. And hopefully not be left with too many at the end to address. So I'm here to talk about the future of farmers markets, and a lot of you probably already sell at farmers markets. So hopefully I can talk about a few other options that will be of interest to you as well. My screen is frozen. I can't get to the next slide. Yeah. Well, anyway, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. While I can't do anything with my screen for some reason. I'm sorry, guys. At any rate, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and maybe Kate can get that screen up. I work for Future Generations University as well with Mike. We do a lot of projects in the maple syrup world with involving research and education, generally down here in the Appalachia. I also live on a farm and have some livestock, a market garden, and do a little bit of syrup making myself. As part of those projects, as part of the research, I did a little bit of walnut and birch on my farm as well this year. But I also manage the Pendleton County Farmers Market, which is a small market here in Pendleton County, West Virginia. So I'm going to try stopping this share and going back out. All right, Kate's trying to pull up my presentation from her computer because mine is just pausing out. But I'll start talking through the first slide anyway. So as a producer, you have a number of direct-to-consumer options. Some of these options include on-farm sales and farm stands, which, as we know, are very popular for maple syrup, and many of you probably already do or are considering it. So hopefully I'll have some information that's of interest to you. And you can go to the third slide, Kate. There are also online sales platforms, which Zachary Smith from the University of Vermont Extension will talk more about tomorrow night in tomorrow night's session. Now, for those of you who live in more populated areas than I do, which is probably everyone, it might be worth considering a home delivery option. So this would be something that you have to make sure that you protect your business and yourself by keeping yourself safe. So consider things like maybe porch drop-offs. But you also want to protect your business and consider additional costs. Fortunately, right now, gas is really cheap, so this might actually be an option for you. And then there are farmers markets. So I'll spend the majority of this presentation on farmers markets. And some other options include local CSAs and other local retailers. All right, so on-farm sales. When considering any of these options that I mentioned before, the common theme throughout them is going to do what you can to limit or remove human contact and to stay safe if you can't entirely eliminate the human contact, unfortunately. So when doing on-farm sales, it's important to remember that your signage should be large and easily visible from the road. Minimum lettering should be about 6 inches tall, though you can get away with 4 inches if it's a slower road. That's more like 30 miles per hour or less. You want to make sure your farm stand is in a safe location for folks to be slowing down and pulling in off the side of the road. And in all situations, if you're selling, if you ask me, you should always have prices clearly marked, especially if there's not a person there to provide service. So if you're doing like an honor box system, make sure your prices are clearly marked. And you also want to make it obvious how folks can pay. So if you're drawing people in with roadside signage, consider putting it on your roadside signage that you have other payment options if you do. That way, you know, if you have someone driving by who knows they don't have cash in their wallet, you can still grab them with that impulse purchase by letting them know they can purchase via other means if you have Square or one of these other platforms that allows credit card sales. One of the beauties of on-farm sales is that it's generally acceptable for them to be fairly basic, quaint or farmy, if you will. So hand-painted signs, barnwood, etc., are kind of nice and just fine. But you still want to put some thought into your display, make sure it's a nice display, and make sure it's clean, because you're selling a food product after all. And you want to instill confidence in your customers that what's inside the bottle is also clean and edible. Some other considerations: don't have rusty farm equipment sitting around. It may seem obvious, but I bet a lot of us have pieces of farm equipment that you drive past every day and don't really think about the hazards to the public if you're inviting the public onto your farm. And likewise, if you have intimidating dogs that are going to bark at customers, this might not be a good option for you. You might want to consider something else. Another thing to consider is to make sure that you're far enough off of the road for folks to pull in safely and with clearly marked parking. So, we want to keep everybody safe in this process. Unfortunately, it's best these days to just eliminate all sampling. Most markets are recommending it. Most health departments aren't going to be keen on passing out samples, which we know do really well for maple sales. Alrighty, next. All right, you can also look into teaming up with other local retailers. Many of you probably already do. The beauty of maple syrup, as we know, is that it fits into so many different categories. So think outside the box, not just food, but as for selling it as souvenirs in gift shops, etc. Here in West Virginia, we have a lot of our gas stations are owned by a local West Virginia company called Parmar, and they give their individual gas station managers a lot of freedom to purchase local products, etc. So that's another thought. Some of these small gas stations, even though it says Exxon on it, find out who it is that maintains the retail portion. They might be open to carrying some of your local products, and they're definitely a business that has remained open throughout this pandemic and are likely to remain open. Next. CSAs, or community supported agriculture, is another option. Most often the farm will sell shares that provide a weekly, biweekly, or monthly box of what's available from the farm. The beauty of this in the agriculture system is that the money comes up front when operational costs are really high and economics are generally tightest. So if you have some local CSA programs around you, consider reaching out to them and seeing if they're interested in putting maple syrup in their shares. I have a lot of friends who sell CSAs, and everyone I've reached out to has been like, oh, great, that would be an awesome either bonus for their share or to help increase the value of what's in the share, or like that. So a good CSA doesn't just dump you with like 20 pounds of zucchini every week for the month of July, which is what's often readily available on the farms, but actually provides a nice variety. Some even team up with local beekeepers and provide honey. And I just want to point out that basically anywhere that honey's in the marketplace, maple syrup can be too. So keep your eye on that and think about that. Some CSAs provide additional things that you can purchase as sort of add-ons, like eggs or maple syrup, and folks add those on via online purchases most of the time, and then can just pick them up with their shares. So be creative about it, and be creative about about what products you can offer in these CSAs. Not everybody can go through a bottle of maple syrup every week, but I guarantee everybody can go through a baggie of maple candy every week. CSA providers, the farmers will probably ask that you package your products in similarly priced sizes or quantities, because they'll often sell like shares that are like, say, $30 a box, and they'll want to allot 5 or 6 or 8 of that towards maple products each week. And that just makes it simpler on the people managing the CSA. And if you don't have a local CSA willing to work with you, consider starting your own subscription service. People are really into subscriptions these days. You can get subscriptions to things like razors and succulent plants to dog toys and camping goods. It's kind of crazy. So I just want to encourage you to think out of the box and try other options. And how to find some of your these local outlets. I am from Virginia and living in West Virginia right now. So these are some of the ones that are around us, but most regions have a regional directory or registry where you can find how to buy local. I know that localharvest.org is New York based. And Google's really a great place to start for these directories, and using buzzwords like buy fresh, buy local, local harvest, local offerings with your region will help you find those. Okay, now on to farmers markets. So I'd like to point out first and foremost, if you're considering joining a farmers market that you're not already a part of, be sure to reach out to them and ensure that you can comply with their regulations, because every farmers market is going to have different regulations regarding COVID. And we already know they vary state by state, but each market is probably going to be different as well. So make sure they're a good fit for you and what you can achieve. The good news, there is good news, is that there's an incredibly increased interest in buying local right now. So this is a great time to take advantage of that and build up your customer base. One thing we know about food purchasing is that it's very habitual. If you think about how often you go to the grocery store and buy something new, you can realize like most of us just pick up the same items from week to week. So if we can start building this customer base and meeting that demand right now, we're likely to see these customers come back. And hopefully when COVID blows over, you'll still have this great customer base that will be habitually buying your syrup. Okay. So regardless of your market's individual standards, these are important points to keep in mind. The really person-to-person infection is the #1 concern. Surface infection could be considered secondary. So do what you can to minimize human-to-human contact as much as possible, if not entirely. So if you can, go cashless. We all know what kind of germs cash carries. Here's a picture of my friend Ian loading someone's goods up for them directly. If you have a drive-through market or something along those lines, or if you can pre-bag your items and have them ready to go and hand off, and have separate people handling money than are handling the product. If you can't go cashless, is helpful. And so again, no matter what your market requires, I say take the necessary steps to ensure that your customers feel comfortable buying food products from you. So wear your gloves, wear your masks. Though your markets will probably require that. All right, next. Market setup is always important, but now more than ever, because we're going to really, the focus is going to be moving people through your market stand with little contact and not avoiding bottlenecks and things like that. The goal is always to create a smooth, easy, and enjoyable purchasing experience for your customer. So set up your stand so that traffic flows in one direction throughout the stand. In general, people instinctively move to the right. So you can keep that in mind when you're setting up the flow of your stand. Maybe put the register towards the right as the customer sees it, so they're walking past all your product and then ending up at the register. The register should be obvious. Where you pay should be evident, but it should not be a bottleneck. So don't put your most popular item right in front of your register, but on the other end to draw folks in and, like we said, move them along. Long before COVID, there were studies that showed that customers really don't like to be touched or brushed up against from behind, whether that's by merchandise or other shoppers. And they'll actually move away from merchandise they were interested in to avoid this from happening. They call it the butt brush, and it should be avoided at all costs. Nobody likes it, especially nowadays with in this age of social distancing. And the jam experiment. So back in 2000, psychologists from Stanford and Columbia universities did an experiment on buying habits, and they used jams. They looked at a display that usually carried 24 different jams varieties and changed it to only offer 6. The display of 24 jams generated more interest, but it actually saw fewer sales. The display with only 6 choices was 10 times more likely to result in a sale. While the large variety of choice seems appealing, it ultimately paralyzes the consumer. So think about that when you're setting up your market display. Most markets do not want customers lingering in stands these days, so taking their time browsing and shopping. And generally, consumers want to feel good about the purchase they made. They want to make sure they made the right decision, or they want to feel confident that they made the right decision. So if there's too many choices with too many nuances making up the differences of flavors, et cetera, folks are less sure of their decisions, and sometimes that paralyzes them and they're unable to make a decision. So it's always good to offer some variety, but keep it balanced. And you can still provide all your products by changing it up from week to week, which will, if you're selling at a weekly market, that'll have folks coming back for more each week. Some basic market etiquette. So despite our increased difficulty in moving product these days, you definitely don't want to dump it at a low price. It's our goal to consistently want to increase the value of our product, right? And not devaluate it by dumping it at low prices. Some markets actually have rules against dumping. And it's not as big of a problem with maple syrup, I don't think, as it is with things like cucumber and zucchini when they're in season. People just have hordes of it and are trying to get rid of it. But it's something to keep in mind. You want to keep your competition fair, and especially if there's another maple producer in your market, check out their prices. Make sure you guys are comparable. Don't undermine them. We're all in this together, right? Okay. And then my advice is to stick with it. Don't give up on the market if you go to one market and you really don't have good sales. I see this a lot at my very small market in Pendleton. Folks show up one time, don't have good sales, and they're like, oh, forget this, it was not worth it. But I can't emphasize enough how you build your customer base by being there and being consistent. It's not necessarily going to happen on the first market, but you need to be there. You need to be consistent. One thing I find is that a lot of people don't even look at the name of your farm, but they do recognize your display. So keep your display fairly consistent too. They'll recognize the colors of your tablecloth and your location at the market. So hopefully you can keep your same location and just be consistent, be there week to week and offer a quality product. And once you do, you'll see that some of your customers will even follow you from market to market. So, all right. And I'm just putting this screen back up to show, in case anybody wanted to look at those links. And next, we're going to have Hannah Scott from Ohio State University's Center for Cooperatives talk about cooperatives.
Okay, thank you so much, Karen. Fantastic resources and information there from Karen regarding, excuse me, farmers markets and farm stands and various avenues for selling directly to consumers. I'm going to talk this evening about cooperating really with other producers to access new markets. Those markets could be direct to consumers, like the ones that Karen was just sharing with you, or they could be institutional markets like schools. And in some instances, they may be retail markets that Karen mentioned, and Kathleen, I think, will be talking about more this evening. As Karen mentioned, I'm with the Center for Cooperatives in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences at Ohio State. Just briefly, here is our center's mission. Really, we're all about extending knowledge and technical assistance to emerging and existing cooperatives in our region and beyond. We do development with groups of people who are thinking about starting a cooperative enterprise or who think a cooperative enterprise might solve a problem that they're facing. We support and conduct applied research, and we provide education on the cooperative model and on rural business models generally. And I just wanted to mention that I'm located in Piketon, Ohio, at the Ohio State University South Centers, where we have a number of resources that are available to producers in aquaculture, in horticulture, and specialty crops like fruits and vegetables, and then in soil, water, and bioenergy, along with a number of programs that do business development. So I just wanted to mention that in case you'd like to access our resources there at the website you see on the bottom of the slide to learn more or to find resources that might be helpful to other parts of your enterprise in addition to maple syrup. So without further ado, let's jump into our discussion about cooperating to access new markets, which we know is particularly important right now. So I'm going to talk specifically about the cooperative business model, which is really a formal way of cooperating in business with multiple owners. But cooperating to access new markets could be informal arrangements with other producers as well. And whether a group works together formally or informally, I think there's a lot to learn from the cooperative model. And I welcome your questions and your feedback if you've used the collaborative approach before. And to that point, I think we have a poll question that Karen or Kate are going to help us pull up for you. Yeah. So we'd love to know if you've ever collaborated with another producer to aggregate and sell your product. Really, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about cooperatives and the cooperative model. So if you'd like to participate there, please feel free. And that'll give us a better idea of where kind of everybody's working from these days in their experience level. So I'm just going to keep talking, and Kate, I'll welcome you to end the poll when you think that's appropriate. Thanks, Kate. So what is a cooperative? It's really a form of business, a business model for doing business in a way that is collaborative. So it's, oh great, I see the poll results here. So some of you have tried collaborating to aggregate and sell product, and some have not. So hopefully everybody can take some ideas away from this presentation and all of the presentations we have over the next 2 days. So a cooperative, it's really just a model for doing business collaboratively. And cooperatives provide a framework for multiple small businesses like farmers or individuals even to own, control, and benefit from a business enterprise while they remain independent. I get a lot of questions often about if producers form a cooperative, does that mean that they are no longer in control of their individual farm business? And that's not the case. So really the individual farm business remains independent, but is collaborating through this formal structure to do business with other producers or other similar businesses. And we'll talk about the reasons for that. In particular, we see cooperative enterprises increase in times or situations where there's some type of market failure. So maybe there's a substantial difference in bargaining power between certain sectors in the supply chain. That's where we see cooperatives serving the greatest need and appearing most often. And I think we can say that this is probably one of those times. The cooperative framework is guided by a set of internationally recognized principles. So you can see those 7 principles here on my slide. These principles really guide the purpose and the operations of a cooperative in some unique ways. Some cooperatives prioritize certain of these principles really prominently, but they all really adhere to all of these principles in the way that they do business. So just quickly, we'll talk about each one of them. First, cooperatives are voluntary and open. So if you can become a member of the cooperative and benefit from the services or functions of the cooperative, then typically cooperatives have open membership regardless of other considerations. Now, that doesn't mean, for example, I farm with my family, but we don't produce maple syrup. So if a group went to start a maple syrup marketing cooperative, I wouldn't really benefit from that organization. So I wouldn't become a member because I couldn't utilize the services. But a maple syrup producer who could would be likely able to join that cooperative. The second principle is one that I think is really important. Cooperatives utilize democratic member control to make their decisions. So they operate on what we call a one member, one vote system. So every member in the cooperative has the same voice in the cooperative, regardless of their level of investment or the level of business that they do with the enterprise. So that can be extremely important in the way that the business actually makes decisions. The third principle over here on the right is member economic participation. So really this means that cooperative members are the ones who finance the business, they're the ones who provide the capital, and they're actually the ones who utilize the business. So if there's a cooperative established for marketing maple syrup, the producer members are the ones who use the business in that they market through the business. They sell their maple syrup through that business. Number 4 is autonomy and independence. So as I was mentioning, cooperatives are built of members from many different farms or households or other businesses, but they are their own organizations and they make their own decisions. That doesn't mean that the farms that are members of cooperatives don't make their own decisions anymore either. The two are actually separate. They're independent and they continue making their own decisions. Number 5 is education, training, and information. So cooperatives do a lot of education with their members and with the general public, partly on the cooperative business model, but also partly to benefit their members. So for example, if there's a cooperative of dairy farmers, it makes sense for the cooperative to help those dairy farmers produce better milk. And so they might provide education or services that are related to training to do that. And so that they are actually marketing a higher quality product on behalf of those members. Number 6 is cooperation among cooperatives. So that's exactly what it sounds like. Cooperatives often work together to further the purposes and missions of both or multiple organizations. And then number 7 is concern for community. So cooperatives, because they're member owned and controlled, are really rooted in the places where they serve their members. And so we often see cooperatives engaging in those communities in many different ways that are beneficial to their communities. So there are a number of cooperatives in the United States in the agricultural sector. According to USDA in 2017, which is some of the most recent data we have on agricultural cooperatives, we know that there are about 1,800 agricultural cooperatives in the US, and they have over 1.8 million voting members. And when you consider the number of active farmers in the US, that's a pretty large proportion of those active farmers who are voting members of cooperatives. And you can see the sales of items here on your screen. Cooperatives are major forces in many sectors of the agricultural economy. So they market a substantial portion of certain agricultural products in the US, like, for example, dairy products. So you can see here that of those 1,800 or so agricultural cooperatives in the US that market, the vast majority of those do grains and oilseeds or cotton, dairy, and fruits and livestock. You don't see maple syrup called out here. I'm not aware of any large agricultural cooperatives that market maple syrup, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. If others on the call this evening know of them, I would really love to hear about them. And it also doesn't mean that it's not happening or couldn't happen on a small scale. And we'll talk about cooperatives that are small scale that may not be captured in this data that are marketing for their members in order to access new markets. And so when a cooperative is thinking about, or a group of farmers, I should say, is thinking about whether a cooperative or a collaborative approach between multiple producers could help them, for example, access new markets, this is the question that we often ask those groups when we're helping them think through whether that makes sense. And the question is, can you do something better as a group than you can individually? And I'll share some examples of small producers who found that this was true for them in order to access new markets. But there are also examples where this may not be true. And so agricultural economists think about cooperation in terms of market integration. So it's really about taking sectors of the agricultural supply chain and coordinating them. And so the question really is, can you do something better that way than you can on your own? And that might be a question of pooling resources. It might be a question of reducing redundancies. For example, perhaps every producer is selling into a school or university. Maybe we see multiple producers selling into a university system, and they're all moving their product separately. They have their own trucks distributing that product. Well, in some instances, it actually would be better for those folks to cooperate to share those distribution costs and reduce the redundancies so that they aren't all individually incurring those costs. In other situations, it does not make sense necessarily for folks to work together. And I'm seeing a comment here that there is a maple producer co-op in Wisconsin. Thank you, Suzanne, for letting me know that. I will have to look into that group and learn more. I was not aware of them. And so when we're thinking about agricultural cooperatives in terms of a model, we're often thinking about an enterprise where independent producers work together to own and control a business that either provides inputs. So you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, that really represents the part of the supply chain that is maybe supplying equipment or other supplies, doing milling or warehousing or even manufacturing those supplies that are involved in the production sector of the supply chain. And so sometimes cooperatives actually go into that sector of the supply chain, and they do bulk purchasing on behalf of their producer members in order to save costs. And so that could be bulk purchasing of supplies, like we worked with groups who've done that for animal feed, or we've worked with groups who have looked at that for things like seed that they all purchase together. You know, in the maple context, maybe that's things like bottles or taps or other type of equipment. And then on the right side of your screen, you can see that cooperatives in some instances provide marketing functions on behalf of producers. And so that's another step towards the consumer in the supply chain. And those functions, when we think about marketing, really encompass quite a few activities that a marketing cooperative could do on behalf of their members. It's not necessarily just getting all the product together and getting it out to consumers. In some cases, it involves actually processing that product further. Maybe it involves grading it. Maybe it involves research to help develop new products for producers to have other avenues to sell their products. Often, though, this marketing function is done through aggregating the producer's products and selling it on their behalf, or at least bargaining on their behalf. And then down here at the bottom, I have a note about some other cooperatives that provide services to members. So maybe that's credit or electricity or communications or insurance or various other services that producers want to work together to either have access to or to have better quality. And so cooperatives can operate in one of these spaces, or they can operate in a number of these spaces. Some cooperatives do all three. So if we take a look a little more closely, this is just a schematic to me think about marketing cooperatives and what they're doing to help their members. And so on the left side, you see that basically marketing cooperatives take member products. Sometimes they literally physically take member products. Those products could be fish, they could be timber, they could be fresh produce, corn, or they could be maple syrup. And then the cooperative provides some or many marketing functions. So it could, like I mentioned previously, be processing or grading or distribution, or sometimes it's simply sales on behalf of the member. And the question really is, what benefit does this provide to the cooperative members, to those producers of, for example, maple syrup? One of those benefits, or potential benefits, I should say, is extending the producer's control of their product in the supply chain one step further. So if a producer typically sells their product to a third party who then sells it, they don't necessarily have control over that next step in the supply chain of marketing. But in a cooperative model where the producers own and control the business that does that marketing, they've then extended their control. In some instances, they might be able to realize additional margins. Like we talked about, maybe they have reduced duplications or they've created more efficient systems. And then in some situations, they might be able to save resources. Those resources could be time for those producers, or they could be capital like money. And I say that cooperatives might be able to do these things because it's a question, like any business, of whether those benefits that are specific to an individual business can actually occur. So it requires some thoughtful analysis and some thoughtful business planning. So financial projections and business planning and understanding and assessing markets is something that we have helped producer groups do to see whether these benefits are possible through a cooperative model that's specific to them. And I think some of our colleagues are going to talk tomorrow evening about the importance of business planning. And that is certainly a part of assessing whether a cooperative could be a potential avenue for accessing new markets. So one of the ways I think is most helpful to learn model is to actually think about some examples. So what are real examples of small and medium producers coming together to market their products into new market channels? So on your slide, you can see the Southern Ohio Growers Cooperative, SOGC, is a group of farmers in Central and Southern Ohio who raise specialty crops, including pumpkins. We worked with this group for probably about a year, maybe actually a little bit longer. They started meeting in 2015 and 2016 after some large retailers started looking to source pumpkins from their region directly to their stores. But those retailers were looking for quantities of pumpkins that was really larger than any one of these farmers could produce, or could produce without taking on a really substantial amount of risk to their individual operation. So this group of, I believe it started with 5 farmers, started talking about and exploring whether they could work together to actually start selling into these markets. None of them sold into those markets previously. Some of them had on-farm sales, or they sold to like small garden centers, but none of them sold to large retailers before. So turns out, so you can see actually us doing those financial projections that I talked about there, projected onto the wall. And they started selling pumpkins to large retailers and wholesalers in 2016, and they continue to do so. They have a part-time employee who markets their pumpkins on their behalf. The individual coordinates their sales, and they work together at the beginning of the season to select the products. So they started with pumpkins, but maybe they could move into straw or fall ornamentals or other types of products. So they work together at the beginning of the season to discuss that and to discuss the types of varieties of pumpkins that they'll sell based on the feedback that they're getting from their markets. And so one interesting thing after about the first year or two with this group was, in some cases, there were in that first couple of seasons instances where one of the co-op members had a total or near total crop loss. And if that producer was working on their own to sell into larger markets, and they had a total or near total loss of all of their product and couldn't actually bring the product that they had committed, in some cases that might mean the loss of a customer for them. But in this model, the other members were able to fill in that product, and they were able actually to service all of their customers. And because of that, spreading that risk across all of the members, they didn't lose accounts because of that member's crop failure, where in an individual basis, they may have had some issues with that. So the next example is from Northern West Virginia, the Preston County Growers Cooperative. So this is a group of specialty crop producers who were selling into retail outlets like farmers markets and CSAs and restaurants that, like Karen was mentioning. And they started to learn more and engage in sales to their local school systems. And initially, the group of, I think this also was 5 farmers, somewhere between 5 and 7, I think, farmers. They were initially all selling to schools on their own, but they realized that working together could reduce some of the duplications on their end. So maybe that was in delivering product, or maybe literally it was just in terms of billing and handling the administrative tasks of selling products. And they also realized that if they could work together, they could make local sourcing a little bit easier for their school systems, where the school would be able to work only with one transaction, basically with a cooperative, rather than many producers at a time. And sometimes making those transactions easier is what it takes to get larger institutional customers, or it can be important to getting those larger institutional customers, or continuing to work with them. So the group worked together also after they formed their cooperative to improve the quality of their product by developing food safety systems and working together to kind of figure out and implement good agricultural production or good agricultural practices, GAP practices on their farms, to improve their food safety and potentially to open additional markets that would require GAP practices or audits or certifications. And because of the unique demands of school markets, the group also works together to do seasonal production and market planning. So figuring out what actually their markets are going to ask for ahead of time and planning their production in part to meet that market. And then the last example I'll show you, the Buckeye Valley Beef Cooperative. This was formed by a small group of livestock farmers in Southwest Ohio that we worked with, who were interested in expanding their sales. And in particular, they wanted to expand into small and medium grocery stores and other retail outlets. Similar, for example, Karen was explaining opportunities to move into maybe retail outlets that you haven't thought about before. So they were really interested in that because it was going to potentially increase the share of the food dollar that they received from marketing beef cattle. And they felt like they could increase that food dollar that they were receiving back on the farm by participating in a shorter supply chain than they typically did with their beef cattle. So maybe they were selling into auction houses or other longer supply chains. And they were really interested in doing more direct to consumer or direct to retail sales, But that can be difficult, especially in meat marketing, to retailers who need a larger volume of product, or they need consistent product. We know grocers want to have product on their shelf all or most of the time, and that having seasonal fluctuations in a grocery store is not really great for business. And so this is particularly difficult when it comes to best-selling meat products like the middle cuts, steaks, those types of things that are limited. And so this group started working together to actually aggregate their beef and to sell to retailers and direct to consumers through subscription boxes, again, another marketplace that Karen mentioned. This group, like the pressed and growers that I mentioned, also worked together to develop production guidelines and to communicate about production cycles and planning based on their markets on a regular basis, so that they could service those markets in a way that was consistent, or that is consistent. And so their really goal market is small and medium retailers. And I kind of talked with them at one point. They were servicing, I think, 5 small retail grocers. And so in each of these examples, you can see some of the main advantages that cooperatives offer to members. And so those could be benefits that come from aggregating products or aggregating inputs. It could be from pooling resources. And one of those potential benefits is accessing markets that might not be easily accessible for a single producer. Or even if it is accessible for a single producer, maybe reducing the risk that a single producer would have when they go into those marketplaces. And remember that each of these businesses is controlled by a board of directors that's elected from and by the farmer members. So they're accountable to the members of the co-op, and their primary interest really is in benefiting the members of the co-op. But as much as I'm a fan of cooperatives, I'll be the first to tell you that they don't always work in every situation, and they might not be a fit for great groups. I didn't show you examples of groups I've worked with that didn't go on to form a cooperative. Maybe I should add that to a future presentation. But in some instances, not all members are willing to share, and it doesn't make sense in some instances for all members to share. And when I say share, I'm talking about both control and profits. So for example, if a producer has access to markets that are profitable and their operations profitable with a tolerable amount of risk, maybe a cooperative isn't the right fit, or it's not needed in their case. Also, remember that cooperatives are organized for member benefit rather than profit maximization. And that can make things a little bit complicated in terms of financing, at least initially, and sometimes ongoing compared to other types of businesses. That's not an insurmountable hurdle, but really it's something that requires some education and really clear communication upfront regarding financing. And then finally, working in groups, as we all know, is complicated. And it's especially complicated when you start doing business in a group. So for that reason, sometimes cooperatives don't function as well as they could or should. And even when they are functioning well, they can be complicated to manage because it's really a business that brings together multiple owners. And with that, I am happy to answer questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to wrap up and turn things over to our next presenter, Fred Arns, who's going to talk about another way that producers are collaborating. But I encourage you to get in touch with our team. Here's our contact information. If you want to talk more about co-ops, or if you have questions or ideas that you'd like to share. So Fred, I'm going to bounce it over to you now.
Okay, Is the screen up now? Looks like it is. This is Fred Arns with Richard's Maple Products. And I'm talking about the Ohio Miracle Maple Mile. Our business just celebrated 110 years in May. And we sell over 160 maple products that we make all right here in Chardon, Ohio. We do mostly wholesale, some retail, and we have many stores throughout Ohio and the United States that we have as a cooperative to sell in partnership with. We are open year round, 7 days a week, other than a few holidays. So our first weekend of the Maple Tour went very well. Had to turn away many people. It was so successful that a lot of the places were overwhelmed with cars. They had to turn people away for later time or the next day. It went so well. During that week, everything sort of crashed. Everything kind of came to a head in Ohio. We were one of the first states to shut down, which caused all of our state parks and county parks to close, which were part of the tour also, and put everybody else in pretty much turmoil. We decided to keep going with our second weekend as we start ours the first part of March. Other states up north started later, so they were not able to do anything at all. So we were fortunate to have at least 1 week under our belt. The second week was, I wouldn't call it a disaster, but it was definitely not well attended. Many people weren't certain what was going on and how this was going to affect anything. So our business pretty much overnight went to no business, being that we wholesale so much and partner with so many different parks and that we had to figure out what to do to keep our doors open and at the same time figure out what was going on with this virus and how it was going to affect everyone. So after several weeks of uncertainty, we started talking amongst some of the participants in our normal Maple Festival, which has a huge attendance, 4-day event, trying to figure something out. They, at that point, decided to cancel the festival, and we had to figure out a way to try and sell product and still get rid of what we had made already in the syrup inventory as well. So we decided to come up with a drive-through Maple Festival, which was not a festival. It was deemed not an event. It was simply a way for people to get out. And at that point, this was the end of April by the time we could get this put together in collaboration with the police department, fire department, and the health department to make sure everybody was safe, stayed in their cars. We wore masks, used hand sanitizer, all the guidelines from Ohio, as well as the county level. And nobody was allowed to get out of their vehicle. So it was a very strange time, strange event, but people felt the need to get out of their house. At that point, some of them were in lockdown for 4 to 5 weeks. Kids were driving them crazy. So it was a perfect opportunity to somewhat socialize. So at that point, we opened up, had a good day on Friday. A lot of cars showed up, but we were able to take care of people fairly well, fairly efficiently. We had fair food. We only had 3 trailers at this point. Tried to get a good variety of food and gyros and hamburgers, hot dogs, and then also sausage sandwiches, corn dogs, and then had a dessert trailer with funnel cakes and that. We made our own cotton candy and caramel corn and try and be part of the same type of event as if someone was walking through the festival, but just much smaller. By the second day, traffic got so bad that we had to shut the event down. There were cars lined up on Main Street, which is our State Route 6. Both directions, about 50 cars apiece, each direction, plus our parking lot was full. And at that point, working with the police department, we just had to shut it down and try and figure out a different way to present this in a much bigger area. We never expected this kind of turnout, but clearly people are over being at home and some still not being able to work yet. So we moved to Ransom Sage Farm, which is on the north side of town. We ended up working out very well. Had almost a mile long, well, a little over a mile long driveway, which is where we came up with the Maple Mile. Things worked out much better there. We were able to get 10 to 12 vendors. We opened up to more food trailers. We had about 6 food trailers plus Buckeye Chocolates brought in fudge and chocolate and kettle corn and get the whole ambiance of a fair or festival. And we had just about every food you can imagine to have there, and it was just a huge success. First weekend we pulled in about 2,500 cars roughly. It was just amazing. The second weekend slowed down a little bit, but it was still so packed. People were waiting 2 to 4 hours to eat, but they still didn't care. They were just interested in getting out still and seeing other human beings, it seemed. Here's some more pictures of the landscape. We had some places we had 2 lanes where the cars could get around. If they didn't want certain foods, they could get around instead of waiting to help speed things up. Did what we could to keep everybody moving and keep them satisfied, but it was just nonstop traffic. It was very difficult to do, but everybody understood and it went well. So we just had a few good weekends, and we weren't sure what was going to happen. At this point, fairs and festivals were still not allowed. A lot of stores were still shut down in Ohio, and were not allowed to open as deemed essential. We weren't sure what was going to happen. You know, our business had still not changed much. And so we decided to keep this moving and start traveling in different counties. So we went on to Stark County in Canton, Ohio, and had just about the same results. There was a few concession trailers here and there allowed to pop up in parking lots, convenience stores, but for the most part, nothing like this was able to happen. And a lot of the counties weren't allowing it to happen. So we're able to get into Stark County and work with the health department again in the county fair and get the social distancing and the masks and all that. And they stayed in the cars still at this point. And everybody's still happy. Here we only had about a half-mile driveway, but it was backed up most of the time, and it was about a 2-hour wait at this point. Still amazed. We could not believe the amount of traffic coming out in support of this and wanting some kind of normalcy. So we did do this 2 weekends in Stark County. We had local coverage for our newspapers and radio stations. We'd already reached out anyway and had a relationship with the TV stations for the promotion of the normal Maple Tour for Ohio. So we did interviews and got the enthusiasm up through the stations. People were coming from Pittsburgh and the other side of Cleveland, which is both about an hour and a half drive. It was just unbelievable, the amount of traffic coming. So we had to actually gain national attention, which, you know, blew our minds, not imagining something like this could happen. We were on the excuse me, we were on the Colbert Show, Good Morning America, ABC, and it just took off to something crazy. Like nothing like we had ever imagined. We just figured we're just doing another show, and it was just gonna be another event to make the kids happy and parents, and apparently it's something that people had not thought of outside of where we were, and we just figured it was another day. So next stop was Portage County, which was in between the first two. Same thing again. We had a variety of food, and I think that's key to having a wide variety of things for everybody to enjoy, and the different interests. It's something very pertinent to make it successful. Limiting your food. You don't want to have doubles, but you want to limit your food. You want to not limit your food and have everything that somebody would want. And credit card sales are definitely a plus, especially in this situation where people were waiting on money and they were getting stimulus money, but the credit card sales were definitely a contributor as well as cash. Now we're moving on to Creston, which is near the center near Mansfield, and we're doing that this weekend. At this point, I think around here everyone's doing it at this point. A lot of county fairs have a small amount of food at each location, and so the excitement's kind of wearing down, but there are still a lot of people coming out and supporting all of us in Northeast Ohio. At this point, we're probably not going to move to every weekend. We're going to go a little bit more distant and make it a little bit more fun and interesting. And as our restrictions are lessened, Ohio is opening up at this point. And we have more competition as far as what we're doing, as restaurants are allowed to open up outside, and then now some of them inside. There's definitely more competition and less of a draw for what we're doing. Will it continue? I'm not sure. We do plan on having several events all summer long. At the next few, we will be allowed to exit cars as the new regulations or new guidelines are coming down. So people are going to be allowed to walk up to the trailers, and they'll be able to park in the parking lots. We'll be allowed to have bands at this point, and a little bit more fun, to where people will stick around a little bit longer and participate a little bit longer, and have blankets or chairs out where they can do a little bit more and hang around and spend a little bit more money. The key is diversity. As far as maple, everybody has maple syrup on their table to sell. If you have other things, it's going to draw more attention. And I think that's key, that you have a variety of things and something unique to your location or or what you do. It's gonna increase the sustainability of your farm or your operation. So that's it for me. And I believe at this point, I know I'm done really early, but Kathleen, I believe, is next.
I suspect it's still the same, but I will, can people see it okay?
Yeah, we can see it. It's still not in the view mode, and I can try to pull it up for you if you would prefer, or we can proceed like this. Your call.
Okay. I don't think it's going to be that. I don't have like a million slides. So anyway, thank you. I appreciate getting the opportunity to share a little bit about what ASD is doing. And I think it's interesting. I think y'all did a great job of stacking us to where my going at the end makes a lot of sense. So I am the director of Appalachian Sustainable Development. We're a nonprofit that is based in Southwest Virginia, but we serve a pretty broad footprint in Central Appalachia. Our mission is about economic transition, and mostly it's focused on ag economic development. Up to now, that has been primarily working with whole produce, a smaller amount of value added and meat products, but by and large, mostly working with whole produce. So we were just a little bit about what ASD does. We are a nonprofit. We are 25 years old this year, and really an important part of what we do is that we are a part of a couple of different networks, including the Central Appalachian Network, and I'll talk about them a little bit more later. But I think one of the prevailing themes that we've heard this evening is about collaboration, and as Hannah talked about, cooperatives, and just even if you're not a formal co-op, just learning how to collaborate with a wide variety of people is something that I will definitely talk more about as my talk goes on. A lot of what I will be talking about today is our Appalachian Harvest Food Hub. If you've not heard that term before, I think most people have, but a food hub is the term that the USDA coined to represent the services and the infrastructure that connect small and medium scale food entrepreneurs and farmers with markets. And I've heard it said that if you've seen one food hub, you've seen one food hub, because they come in all different shapes and sizes. So just a little bit about ours. The Appalachian Harvest Food Hub was started in 2000, so it's probably one of the oldest in the country. We are based in a really rural part of Virginia. We're more closely aligned with Tennessee, West Virginia, Kentucky than we are our own capital in Virginia. And we're out in the middle of nowhere. So the fact that we generate about $3.5 million in sales in produce every year is sort of nothing short of a miracle. We sell to large wholesale buyers. So we have a couple of tractor trailers and a box truck that we use to deliver product to the distribution centers of these buyers of ours. And we go as far south as Atlanta, Georgia, and as far north as Landover, Maryland, or sometimes even into Pennsylvania, depending upon where we need to go. As I mentioned, it's mostly fresh whole produce, though we are trying to diversify a little bit more. We do sell a small amount of value-added product into one of our buyers who has about 200 stores. I think we're only in about 50 of them. We do a lot, and it was interesting because we've been talking with Hannah a little bit about another project that we have and working on co-ops. And when you were talking, Hannah, it was interesting how much of what you say a co-op does, Appalachian Harvest does and is not a co-op. So obviously we're marketing products for people. We do bulk purchasing of supplies. We handle the aggregation and distribution. Because our growers need to have food safety certification to sell into these markets, we have for the last 9 years been helping them obtain training, and then when certification became required, helping them get that certification, reduce the cost of their audits. Not all of our farmers are organic certified, but if they are interested in it, then we provide that service as well. A few other things that we do, like for instance, if I was a farmer, it's my first year to grow kale, I'm going to go, we're going to have someone from ASD go to my farm and help me understand what it looks like to pack that. So what we're trying to do is help the farmers who are participating in this be successful. And that includes providing a lot of video support, which is pretty critical at this time, but also just one-on-one technical assistance and training so that people who are participating in this value chain know that they are going to be supported. One of the things that is the most important is production planning. So, and I recognize I'm talking a lot about produce, but there are many, many parallels. So we do production planning with our farmers. And what that means is in the off season, we work with buyers to get an understanding of what they would commit to buying. So, 50 cases of bell peppers a week from one buyer and 1,000 from another. And we aggregate all of that demand, and then we find farmers to fill it. And what that means then is that those farmers know that they have a market. If they understand the quality standards and we help them with their production planning and their protocols and how they should be growing this and best practices on the farm, then it's not an if you build it, they will come. It's sold, which gives farmers a great deal of confidence. And we're lately, over the last couple of years, have really been seeing that we just have almost no turnover in farmers because I think we finally worked out all of the difficulties. One of our jobs, because we are a nonprofit, is to make sure that farmers are getting the most money they possibly can, which is, again, another reason to have a co-op, though Hannah did point out that profit isn't necessarily the motive, but if you want to be a part of something like that, obviously the financial part of it is very important. So we do some creative things. One thing is that maple syrup producers could think of is, say I grew 2 cases and Mike grew 500 and Karen grew 30. My 2 are not going to Whole Foods in Atlanta without Mike's and Karen's filling up my truck. So that helps little producers and big producers combine to actually make something financially viable for a region. We also do a lot of for-hire trucking. So we looked at our resources and realized we don't grow produce a lot of the times during the winter. And so what can we do? Well, we have trucks. So we just run them as a for-hire service so that we can make money, so that we're keeping people employed and making sure that we can keep costs low for farmers. And again, that isn't something that has to just be done by a tractor trailer. It can be done by anytime you're moving stuff around. So it's just another way to defray costs, particularly in really rural areas. Another way that we're working that, again, I think would have parallels with the maple syrup value chain is we do not believe, especially in rural communities, that you need to have paid infrastructure because it costs too much to keep it up. So we have a couple of different things that we've been doing as examples. We work with a food bank in Kentucky who serves as an aggregation point for some farmers that we work with in Kentucky. We pay them a little bit to keep just keep the farmer's product there just for less than a day usually, so that we can come pick it up. Then that's really a sustainable model. It helps them a little bit and it doesn't cost us or the farmers very much. The other thing we do, and I have a picture there of the Southwest Virginia Farmers Market, which I put that picture up because when you hear farmers market, you don't think that many bays. But that place is at the I-77 and I-81 intersection, and it enables us to work with farmers that are 2 or 3 or 4 hours away from our food hub, who may come from West Virginia, may come from North Carolina, or other parts of Virginia. And again, it's just a creative way of getting more people to participate in a value chain. A few years ago, we started working more deliberately within Central Appalachia. So we started working more, you heard me mention farmers in Kentucky. We have several partners who we are working with to try and figure out how we can help remote farmers have access to markets of scale. And it has been a really great effort that's involved some value-added products, and a lot of produce and a lot of different markets segments. So different partners will serve different markets. As I mentioned, Appalachian Harvest, our food hub, serves a lot of large wholesale, but a lot of our partners within Central Appalachia serve the smaller restaurants or retailers and can provide access to different scales of markets, which is really a healthy way to try and provide people trying to access markets with a whole host of different opportunities. We named it the corridor, which was probably a really bad plan because that makes people think it's an actual road. It is not. It is just, I mentioned Kentucky, we could do an aggregation site there because there were a few farmers there that were interested. And so that is how we're enabling people to get access to markets that are just not actually anywhere near where they are. I wanted to mention Preston County Workshop, which is in West Virginia, which is one of the partners that we worked with. And you can see him, Jeremy, standing in a field of squash. They had not really ever grown anything before. And we had them grow acorn, spaghetti, and butternut squash, because they were not perishable. So what we were trying to think through is what were the limitations for accessing markets. And in the case of produce, that limitation is the perishability of the product. Since winter squashes are not that perishable, that's why we started with that. So with maple syrup, you're going to have a whole lot of different challenges with getting to markets, and perishability is unlikely to be one of those, but it's just different solutions that we have to come up with for the different problems that we face. This is just a quick snapshot of the farmers, the different organizations that are working with us right now on this food corridor. There are a whole host of others. These are probably the ones that are the most active in it. I mentioned the Central Appalachian Network, and I put this messy slide up here because it is messy. We do work with a whole bunch of different organizations, and if we don't, then we really are not getting the full benefit of these networks that can help different farmers access markets in a whole creative, different way. We have also done a lot of work with private industry. So we have a couple of different distributors that were planning with us early on because they had excess room in a truck and we needed product moved. So we paid them a per pallet fee to move product. So those kinds of relationships are mutually beneficial. And because we led with a discussion about business and being financially beneficial. The fact that we were a nonprofit didn't kind of get in the way, because they were able to see the benefit to working with this group of partners. And it has done nothing but grow since over the last few years since we've been working on this project. Karen mentioned something about consistency and quality. And I guess she didn't use the word patience, but I think that's kind of implied. That's what we have seen with the large wholesale markets, is it takes a while to build them, and it takes consistency and reliability to continue to serve them. You don't get very many chances to screw up, and then you don't have a market anymore. So one of the things that we've done is, in working with the corridor partners, sometimes buyers are impractical or perhaps just uninformed about what's growing where. And so they might think, well, I'm a hospital in West Virginia and I want just West Virginia stuff. In fact, I just want stuff from my county. But you've never bought from them before, so they're not growing it. So what we've been doing is moving supply around between Virginia, Tennessee, West Virginia, and Kentucky to help, like, a West Virginia hospital have some products to buy, so that they can start understanding what it's like to build a value chain. And I have found that has really opened up some opportunities for some different buying relationships, and not just for our partners, but for ASD as well. Let's see. I can tell you that one of the things that we're looking at going forward into the future is trying to build a multi-state, multi-stakeholder cooperative, somewhat like some of the things that Hannah was talking about. And the reason for that is that we believe that if we are all working together, we will not be so competitive with each other, and will be more financially viable. And so that's one of the next steps that we are taking. As far as maple syrup, we have been working with Future Generations and some other folks to try and get maple syrup into a couple of our buyers. And where we are right now, and Mike might talk to this, is looking at packaging and branding and figuring out what that model might look like. To be clear, we truly, ASD believes in diversified markets, but it also is a wonderful thing to be able to move a whole lot of product through retail, even though obviously it's going to pay less than if you're doing a direct to consumer, but it also takes a lot less of your time and can move much larger quantities of product. And that's pretty much all I have in terms of what Appalachian Harvest does. That's kind of the high level. Certainly happy to answer questions later if there are any.
All right, thank you, Kathleen. You do have some questions in the Q&A section. So, I'm going to close this out and give you a few minutes to maybe answer those. I want to thank everyone for joining us and for hanging in there while PowerPoint crashed on my computer for the first time ever when we got started. But it's all good now. Looks like it's working. So please tune in again tomorrow night. We're starting at 7 again, and we'll be talking about business and finance in relation to your maple business. If you want to share recordings from this webinar or go back and view them again, you can go to www.future.edu/maple. And you'll see a banner across the top with this guy's mug on it, and a flashing register now, like you might have gone to register for the course. So if you register, if you hit register now, it takes you to this page and you can see those links. Tonight's will be up there. If you clicked on Thursday night's link right now, I think you'll get nothing, but tomorrow night you'll be able to access it there. So, and then soon on that future.edu/maple, we will have the slides available for everyone to see too in the next few days. And it looked like there might have been a question here. Okay, so Thomas asked me, he wrote, farmers markets continue to emerge in rural areas for a variety of reasons. What do you consider the characteristics of the best farmers markets that you've observed, and that can be thought starters for those who attend? Well, kind of hearkening back to that point that I said about consistency and being there every week, some of the best markets I've seen are the oldest markets in the country. I used to sell at DuPont Circle in DC, which is one of the oldest markets, and it's so well established, and its customer base is so well established as well. It's also in a densely populated and tourist area, so it was successful for those reasons. But I've been in smaller markets that sometimes had overpowering managerial demands, like everybody has to have the same tents and the same tablecloths and the same tent weights, and that really, I don't know why they ran their markets that way, but that sort of squashed that market, and our customers would get confused. They'd be like, well, I bought avocados here last week. Are you the guy I bought them from? You know, and so some of those best characteristics, I mean, I can't emphasize enough of that, being in the same place, being consistent, and having your sort of consistent brand, color scheme, et cetera, even if your product is changing a little bit throughout the season. So those are some thoughts. I don't know if that answers your question. And looks like we've got all our questions answered now. So I'm gonna say good night, and we hope you tune in tomorrow. Thank you.